Okay, I think we can start. So the audience, welcome here to our session of our Mars webinar. Today, it's Thursday, November 18th, 2021. And Stefan and I, we are here today in Zurich in the Mövenpick Hotel. And we're happy to hear how to have our webinar tonight about the topics of market access and reimbursement. And my name is Lutz Wurmer, and I will be your moderator tonight. So just before we come to our topic of the German regional drug budgets, we just want to point out our podcast we make, our market access podcast. Great thing. If you haven't tried it out yet, check it out. It's all on your popular platforms like for iOS or Android or Spotify and many more. And the current version is with our good friend, Professor Peter Zweifel. Yes, the famous professor for health economics, the one and only Peter Zweifel, if you haven't heard him yet. So enjoy, great speaker, and also with our good friend Dor Wong from the Netherlands, great entrepreneur with her app Tired of Cancer. So check it out, wonderful thing. Then we just want to point out about the Mars, what is Mars and who is Mars? Mars is the German-speaking market access expert for your topics of price and reimbursement strategies for all your reimbursement submissions with the Federal Joint Committee in Germany and about the DIGAs. Just listen to our podcast, so the digital health applications which are now available in Germany, or the Swiss BAG if you have an application there, or the Austrian Hauptverband. And also, of course, with all your negotiation support and health economics. Speaking about negotiation support, we developed a really nice tool to support you with a price negotiation, our Mars Virtual Reality Bootcamp. If you're interested in, just shoot us a mail or go on our website. It's www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de. Yeah, and then our next topic, our next webinar, you can already register there on Zoom, a really, really Christmas special for you, AMNOG impact on the European countries, a joint webinar with our good friends from Advance. So we have all the European experience here with us, Stefan. Oh, that will be a great, great webinar, so you don't want to miss it. And because it's Christmas and we are also on Christmas break, it's already December 16th.
Yeah, the last Thursday would be a bit late.
Yeah, the last Thursday, that's not just behind the Christmas tree. So, but if you want to listen to it behind the Christmas tree, yes, you can always rewatch our webinars. So we have a nice YouTube channel, go on that. And yeah, that's our YouTube channel. Thank you, Stefan, for that one.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and also the last ones here with all we had Matthias Pilot, and that's actually now a thank you to all our guests here we have on the show on that webinar tonight, who are do that webinar with us now for 1.5 years. It's just a great thing to have you all here. So thank you for that. And you can rewatch all the webinars on our website. And the audience, of course, as always, you're always welcome here to ask questions. So after this webinar presentation, we have time to answer your question that way. And of course, you can here write in the chat your question or use the question answer function here in Zoom, or we'll come in and we'll answer to your questions later. But now we come to our guest tonight, and it's Dr. Mathias Flume from the KV Westphalia-Lippe, from the KV Physicians Association, and he's currently the head of business unit prescription management, and he's sitting in Dortmund. So we say really hello, not to our watchdog, but maybe to our bodyguard tonight, Mathias Flume. Hello, Matthias. Hello nach Dortmund.
Hi Lutz, good evening, and thanks for the great moderation. It's a little bit like an old time Saturday evening in front of the TV, Eurovision. Yeah. We need some music, maybe.
We're working on that.
Maybe we have some guests from Austria and from the rest of the world also. Yeah. So good evening. You see in Dortmund, it's still nice weather. No joking, unfortunately. So dark and autumn here also. But I think a great chance to have this conversation tonight. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, because it's always a pleasure and between challenge and opportunity to talk about not MNOG and abstract things in the German system, but to talk about a KV, where most people think, oh, this is like a health insurance. What are you doing there? So also for our audience from outside Germany, I hope that I can reveal some secrets and you get a maybe slightly better understanding what we are doing with our physicians. My personal background is pharmacist with a PhD in pharmacology many years ago and an MBA. And yeah, shall I tell something about the KV already now, or you start, Stefan? How much shall I say now?
I think I can quickly introduce with maybe 2 examples, because I think it would be probably best then if you would then also cover, obviously, let's say also from the insights, right? I mean, you are the insider of that system. So I would maybe just start with that. Is that fine with you? If we just take it over?
Yeah, I just want to present you our other speaker, which is here next to me. So, hi. That's Dr. Stefan Weltzer. He's the founder and CEO of Mars, and Steph is a health economist by training with a long career in market access at Roche Pharmaceuticals. Welcome here to Zurich. Next to me, actually. Yes, and now Stefan and also Matthias. We heard the regional drug budgets and the KVs, the KVs as the hidden watchdogs in Germany. But we also heard, like from Matthias, maybe watchdog is a little bit nasty. It's more a bodyguard. Bodyguard, I remember here Whitney Houston, right? I will always love you. So KVs, I will always love you.
You won't sing tonight, or?
Please not.
Okay. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you, Matthias. And of course, I think it is, let's put it that way. I mean, Matthias, we know already each other a bit longer. So I think the watchdog is obviously just maybe a bit of a provocation, right? To also get a bit of, let's say, further insights and also really explain, as you already said, what the KVs are really doing. I mean, at the end of the day, for the system, for the physicians, but ultimately then also for the patient. So maybe to start very briefly, and as already said, I think the insights, the real insights, I think will especially come from you, Matthias. I think starting very simple, let's say, with the German healthcare system. It's not like here, right, with the a blank sheet of paper. It is rather like that. I can still remember, I think it was probably one of the very first kind of days when I think Jens Spahn started in his career as a Minister of Health. And that is, I think, was the kind of welcome in the Frankfurter Rundschau magazine, where they just said, look, it's as simple as this. And my dear new minister, you need to, let's say, manage that kind of system in the next couple of years. How we did it, maybe we can discuss that as another point, but I think it might be just interesting to have a look where maybe the KVs are then also located there. I think some see maybe the AMNOG already, we see BfArM and IQWiG on the right-hand side, and we see also the KBV, which is the Kassenärztliche Bundesvereinigung, which is more on the national level, and then we have it here 17 KVs right in the middle before it basically goes to the physicians. And that is also where I think we will then cover that. So you see, it is one part, it's a complex system, obviously, but it's, I think, also a very important part and component, especially when thinking about drugs in the German healthcare system. So different responsibilities, we have just captured here a couple of those. I think it might be best that I think, Matthias, you take that over as well. So what we were more thinking before coming to a bit more, obviously, insights and not really getting into, let's say, some of the general explanations, what the KVs should do and want to do, etc. We were more thinking we would present very briefly, maybe 2 kind of examples where also the KVs have their kind of responsibilities and probably duties. One is the so-called reference price groups, and the other one are pharmaceutical prescription quota. We'll quickly go through that, and then obviously, I think also here within, I think we might have already a couple of questions probably to you, Matthias, and I think especially when we come to the quotas, I mean, we have some interesting results where I think you might be seen, obviously, as somebody from Dortmund at the top, right? So reference price groups, just very briefly, for whoever does not know it exactly, it's basically kind of price regulation instrument, which is then basically, let's say, handled as well by the Federal Joint Committee. So it is a kind of maximum reimbursement amount, which is then being defined by the GBA. I think important is here that in case a pharmaceutical would then, let's say, cost more, so the price would be above that reference price, the patients must pay that difference on their own. So I think there are a couple of examples. I think one of the oldest was probably when it was at 15 years ago or so in the diabetes area, where I would say it was at least difficult to incentivize patients to pay the additional amount. But I know as well that there were some drugs where it might have worked, even though that some others simply said, yes, the reference price, the maximum amount there is something we simply accept, and then we go in there. I think there might as well be other kind of maybe incentives and parts which then being managed there. Reference price groups in general are already quite old. I think they were introduced in 1989. I think interestingly, I think it's especially maybe the kind of savings, right? I think at least some calculations are showing that reference price groups have achieved a total annual savings of 8.2 billion euros by June 2019. So overall, that was, let's say, around 1.5 years ago. Those total savings are still higher when you would take it in comparison to the savings through the AMNOG reimbursement prices. So that's also maybe something keeping in mind. But I think it might also make sense, especially when simply having a look in a couple of minutes, who and which kind of product would basically fall into that reference price group from my perspective. So how are reference price groups built basically? So it's two different steps. One is what you see on the left-hand side is, let's say, the medical comparability. And you see the three different possible stages as well below those two boxes, coming to the right-hand side as well in a second. So there might be, let's say, different kind of groups where those reference price groups could be built on. One is obviously same active ingredient, same pharmacologic class of substances, or comparable therapeutic effects. For example, here, same individual active ingredients with different mode of actions or authorization for the same indication. So that's at least the kind of theory. I think there might as well be some nuances where one would need to further check it. And then there is, besides then the medical comparability and the grouping, let's say, is then the maximum reimbursement price, which is then as well, needs to be then as well defined. Important here as well, I think excluded from those stages 2 and 3 are drugs with patented active substances whose mode of action is novel. I think that's also important. Or that's the other kind of important point, is obviously which represent a therapeutic improvement. So that's also when you have a product and you see maybe there might be, maybe from the industry perspective as well, a risk to get into that reference price group. It's probably as well to check really into the details whether that might really apply or not. But that's as well just something keeping in mind, and we just see that as well, where I personally like to see it as well when you maybe combine it with quota, and that's then as well a way how to manage, let's say, the whole kind of market in order to also, let's say, have that, let's say, cost efficiency, I think, also in mind. So I've just mentioned prescription quotas. The other example, it's another instrument to steer the prescription behavior of physicians, if you want to call it. I mean, there are two different, let's say, parts in here, which is then the national level, which is, I mean, you see on the right-hand side, what I just mentioned, the very early beginning of the presentation, the KBV, the Kassenärztliche Bundesvereinigung, and the core part here is the framework specification for pharmaceuticals. It's maybe the kind of English try to word it, right? It's Rahmenvorgaben Arzneimittel. So I think just stick to that. It's basically adjustment factors for the pharmaceutical expenditure volumes of the respective following years. That's an agreement, right? And then the framework guidelines form then the basis for the regional drug agreements, which then on the right-hand side, on the regional level, those regional target agreements, most, I mean, in German, it's Zielvereinbarung, right? But I think, Matthias, you can probably as well get into those kind of details in a couple of few minutes. Who's responsible for the development of these? I think generally, I think I would also like to hear even a bit more, right? I mean, how do you maybe see that? I think I would rather say, yes, of course, the KVs are in the responsibilities. And yes, of course, it needs as well to be in line with the, let's say, medical guidelines. So it needs to be obviously being seen as, let's say, medical clearly, let's say, or let's say the necessity and the kind of way of our patients are still being treated needs to be there. That's, I think, also quite clear. And I think maybe that's also kind of a question. I think I just put it in there, but I think for me, it would make sense that I think a focus is especially obviously on indications with a considerable saving potential. I mean, we just put in there biologics. We have seen that as well. I think infliximab is in there. I think also on one of the next slides, we see trastuzumab, for example. But I think at the end of the day, it would make sense that this is one of the core drivers, because that's then also making an impact on the whole kind of system. But again, looking forward to hear what I think, Matthias, you would point out there. I mean, just another example of a regional target agreement. You see it here. I think this is from the KV Nordrhein out of 2019, so not one of the latest one, but I think it's still, it just shows you a bit, right? I mean, also let's say the differences between a quota on biosimilars. I mean, here you see directly that it's targeted towards the ingredient there, right? I mean, it's mentioned rituximab, trastuzumab, and a minimum in this case of 66% of prescriptions. And for generics, I think it's a general kind of quota on the use of generics overall. I think the core kind of questions is still then also, coming to my kind of core question in a second. I think we have here, I think also what you can see on your website, by the way, right? KV Westphalia-Lippe, I think another kind of, let's say, way that I think you have quantitative and qualitative goals. Maybe this was something you could maybe quickly touch base on in a second. I think quantitative, I think makes sense, right? You have a number comparable to quotas from other KV regions here. And then qualitative, it's rather something like guidelines for prescription behavior without measurable quotas, but it's just more a general kind of, it should be decreased or so, right? It might also be an interesting one, how you basically then, let's say, control or manage, I think it's probably the better word, right? Manage that over a year. The control
we have the crowd of watchdogs running around, Stefan.
Yeah, good point, Matthias. Very good. I think then obviously, I mean, if you have, let's say, numbers which are kind of given, which you need to fulfill, right? I mean, a control is needed as well, right? So there are also here different methods, reference value methods, which are used in a couple of KV regions, which is basically a comparison of the prescription volumes, also on average, right? Available per patient. I think there are others where, I mean, the comparison of testing is probably more kind of controlling according to the average values for specialist groups sometimes as well, right? Where this is then obviously, I think when you go into oncology areas, maybe making as well a bit of more sense, but also sometimes you have target values which need to be fulfilled. I think a couple of those might also be used in different other areas, sometimes a mix of those different things. You have a couple of further examples from different areas here. We will not go now into the details because I think at the end of the day, it's also more interesting from my perspective if you hear that then directly from Matthias. But before leading over to you, I think I said already, I think if you, for example, take the percentage of biosimilar prescriptions in the different KV regions. And here we have just the two ones, etanercept and infliximab. And you see the, let's say, it's not like in, it is probably, I think like in the COVID maps, everybody knows nowadays, right? The more red, the poorer. And I think what you see basically on the left-hand side, Westphalia-Lippe is very green. So on the top, but also on the right-hand side, when you take infliximab, I think it has a very similar kind of picture. I think maybe it would also be interesting to hear, I mean, are there maybe different kind of focuses of the KVs, or maybe are there also different kind of ways how to manage it in that way that this is also potentially then being achieved. But I think at the end of the day, also here, when you share then the different kind of prescriptions on the biosimilars in general, you see again on top, Westphalia-Lippe. So I think having said that, let's say from the top level of the league out of 17 or out of 18, I'm happy to hand over to Dortmund and to our guest tonight, Mathias Flume. Matthias, I mean, just feel free to bring us your life from the KVs a bit closer.
Yes, happy to do so, Stefan. And thanks a lot for bringing such few questions on the table to discuss with the audience. My goal for tonight is to bring a little bit simplicity now in the discussion, because Stefan very well showed you how complex the framework is, and we could elaborate about each quota, each management approach for maybe hours. My goal is for tonight that you understand what does it KV do? Why is she doing this? How do they act? And understand, especially in the drug management area, their guiding principles. And then we are, I think, very quick into our discussion, and I can answer many questions. And maybe Stefan, if otherwise, remind me also reveal the secret how we managed to get so much track on the biosimilars, for example. What is the history of a KV, Kassenärztliche Vereinigung, Physicians Association? A long time ago, there was imbalance of power between outpatient physicians and statutory health insurances. And so there was the idea to build these physicians associations on a regional basis, usually one per federal country in Germany, only North Rhine-Westphalia, because we would be more than 25% of all people in Germany divided in two parts, as a counterpart to the statutory health insurances, to make, on the one hand, the physicians stronger, but also to balance out. The statutory health insurance insures the patients, pays for hospitals on the hospital or hospital treatment, and for outpatient treatment. And for the outpatient treatment, they have to contract with a regional physicians association. So each physicians association, one designated region, gets one fixed budget. So no matter how much work the physicians do, one budget per insured person per year to us. And we have, in an also complex legal framework, to make sure that there are enough physicians everywhere of all specialties, also specialist treatments in Germany in the outpatient sector, oncologists, rheumatologists, for example, which are more hospital-based in other countries. And for this one amount of money, we have to make our physicians working and as happy as possible, which is, as you can assume, an interesting challenge. So the main job of a KV is the so-called Sicherstellung, provide provision of care, enough physicians everywhere, quality assurance. We have to do quality controls so that the treatment standard is yes, up as it should be. And of course, we have to pay them out of this honorarium budget. So this is our main job, and therefore it's more the bodyguard than the watchdog, because I'm talking about physicians, and you are here to hear a webinar about drug management on a regional basis. So how does this fit together? Of course, our physicians also prescribe drugs, and we have, it's all regulated in the social code book, also a responsibility for an economic prescription. And this is both on the KV level, we have an obligation, and also the individual physician has an obligation. And if he's doing an uneconomic prescription, it can happen that the physician has to pay for this. Pay this money back to the statutory health insurance. So there is always an inherent struggle between the wish to prescribe, to treat as good as possible. On the other hand, there's a financial responsibility. We have to negotiate an annual budget. It's in our region of more than 4 billion euros is our contracting volume per year, so bigger than some of the Eurovision countries. Whatever. So we are responsible for this volume. If it's exceeded, at least in theory, we could be liable with the overall honorarium of the physicians. And there's also an individual responsibility for an economic prescription. So keeping this in mind, you may understand better why, and I see it more as a bodyguard. We are kind of bodyguard in the drug management area to protect our physicians, to provide them a safe area in terms of prescription, a clear guidance. This is safe to prescribe. You have no economic problem if you do a therapeutic choice between those options, for example, and be careful if you choose B or C. So this is a legal obligation. And also, it's sometimes a question, is the physician the friend of the pharma industry or not? Or sometimes yes, But on an abstract basis, keep one thing in mind. I told you that we as a physicians association get a fixed volume per year. And no matter how sick the patients are, how much work the physicians do, it's budgeted, and we can only try to get more money the next year, which is also legally very complex, but we cannot get money on top during the year. While in Germany, each prescription for a patient is fully paid even on December 31st, an eculizumab prescription for 82,000 euros or whatever, fully reimbursed. And of course, the sick funds also do not have infinite money. So it's always, when we negotiate about honorarium, it's always, if the drug cost expenditures increase by 10%, they are not happy to give us 10% also. So maybe you get now a better idea of the positioning of the KV. So we are really close to the physicians. We are dedicated to one region, or we are not in competition versus each other because we this regional focus and see it as a bodyguard. We want to organize a good honorarium for our physicians and freedom and safety to prescribe. So this is maybe on an abstract level, hope not a too deep dive in the social code book in Germany, but that's the KV. And now more closely, drug management. As Stefan said, we have formal obligation doing every year, first on the federal level, then on the regional level, contracts about the prescription volume and also about efficiency reserves and potential efficiency gains. All the contracting we are doing in this part of drug management with the statutory health insurance, it's not about optimization of therapy. It's not about optimal treatment of heart failure from a societal perspective. It's not disease management. To be very clear, this is contracting, how much money is available for prescription, and where are areas where without decrease in quality, savings can be realized. This is all where the contracting and also the drug management of the health insurances KVs is about. And also to be very clear, we are quite stringent to tell our physicians, like with the biosimilars, I will tell you later, you use a biosimilar, it's the same, even if you got nice desks for your office for many years for prescribing some of the branded products. Today you use the biosimilars and have no problem, but we won't protect you and we are not able to do this if you prescribe still the branded product. On the other hand, we want a good treatment for our patients and we want to have as many treatment options as possible for our physicians, because we are also there to protect the freedom in therapy for the physicians. So please always keep in mind this bit tricky in-between position we are having. So what we are doing, for many years, it was just about the overall budget. But overall budget and then an average prescription volume, that were quite strange discussions. At that time, our prescription volume was about 2 billion euros per year. And then the health insurance said, oh, you could prescribe more generics here. You could prescribe less Me Too there. And then you could save whatever 200 million euro in your region. And we said, okay, it's a nice story, but what shall I tell our 10,000 physicians? We want to save 200 million euros. That's so many euros per physician. And when Mr. Weltzer sits in front of you, the next patient you treat, you have to save €5.22, something that doesn't work. So how to translate abstract saving potentials into a guidance that fits into the real treatment and practice reality of the physicians. And that was that we, at the beginning of the century, 2005, we invented this quota. We were the first region working with quotas. It was when Energy ezetimibe was launched in Germany by MSD. And we had the beautiful idea, okay, why having long discussion, Me Too, yes or no, clinical superiority, whatever, but we simply said, okay, it should be a second line drug. So only X% of the statin prescription should be an ezetimibe. And we continued this then with proton pump inhibitors, statins, and so on. Just the idea to tell the physicians what should be the first choice if you think about a kind of drug, and what should be maybe second line, but not discussing what does Stefan receive when he's Wednesday morning in the practice. And that was something we simply did. It was an idea and a negotiation we had with the health insurances. And then we published this, and suddenly we got visits from the Europe Red headquarters for an MSD in Dortmund, which was an interesting experience. So it was a clear signal, seemed to be something that worked and raises attention. Okay. Over the year, we developed it further from a systematic perspective. This whole quota management was developed in a time when you look at it from a more abstract perspective, where two main areas of savings were possible: generics, because at the time where we did not have a mandatory substitution in the public pharmacies, and we had huge differences between the prices of generics also in the generic area to manage there. And Me Too, at a time where we didn't have MNOC before 2011, we had Me Too products, and it was always a discussion, is it really a therapeutic improvement or just an alternative for a much higher price? So for both areas, quotas were a possibility to address those savings. We had ACE inhibitors versus ARBs, for example, such quotas, and so on and so on. And always addressing financial deltas for equivalent treatment options and giving physicians a guidance that works when he sits in front of his 100 patients per day. Not talking about money, not talking about complex contracting, a 5-pager to fill in to get something authorized or whatever, something that works easy and smoothly. And we backed it up from the beginning with a 3-monthly reporting for our physicians, where they could exactly see where am I with my quotas. And of course, if you are good with your quotas, you can prescribe what you want. You have no economic audit. So that's the deal. And that's something the physicians realized, because it provides some safety from an economic perspective. It's easy, and it doesn't interfere into the individual case-by-case decision. So keep in mind, quotas, very useful at that time. Then with MNOC, there was a problem which you see today in the development of quotas, that the Me Too potential, of course, disappeared, because the new word since about 10 years for Me Too is a no additional benefit rating in the benefit assessment process, leading to price parity and therefore to no potential that you can address with a quota. Same with the generic substitution, of course. Now I would come a little bit to the biosimilars. The biosimilars were an ideal area, of course. No mandatory substitution in the public pharmacy, significant price discounts, and great stories about that the biosimilar may explode in the patient, if it may work in all indications of the originator, and so on, heterogeneity between different manufacturing lots, so many discussions. And we were teased from two sides, from the financial delta on the table, and from this little bit, let's call it friendly, it's understandable to protect the market, but obviously, honestly, quite strange discussions many originators started at that time about or against biosimilars. And so we worked together with some health insurances, did some regional contracting with our gastroenterologists, with our rheumatologists, who were, that's also interesting. The further you come down to the real life, and always keep this in mind, it's a difference to talk to KOL or to have the perspective we have when you talk with rheumatologists in the field to prescribe the TNF-alpha every day. And they were very open. They said, of course, they make €1 billion per year. And why shouldn't we have some more, if there are alternatives, no problem. We have many other new drugs we would like to prescribe also. And so we work together with the physicians, incentivize not the biosimilar prescription, but we finance nurses, for example, to do additional rheumatologic assessments and so on out of those contracts. And it was easy reporting, and we simply did it, and it worked. And it's always a combination. If you have a good relationship, communication with your physicians regionally, good reporting, that's important. There are strong differences in terms of reporting capability between the different regions. And that led to the success story that we had a very high uptake there. So maybe I think I covered everything I have on my list here as a quick starter. So keep in mind, KV's counterparts to statutory health insurances, regional focus, different to many health insurances who often have a Germany-wide focus. And we are, let's call it bodyguards for our physicians. And what we are doing mainly in the drug management when it comes to quota, economic audits, and so on, is really part by it's from the Social Code Book 5. And it's really about addressing saving potentials, not therapeutic optimization in the first step. And what we are doing is either quotas quantitative to say X% biosimilars. Sorry, I forgot that question you asked at the end. And we have also some qualitative quotas, not quotas, but also ideas to put in the mind of the physician. Think always about a biosimilar, avoid multi-medication. This is partly a little bit of therapeutic optimization, and we are between us. Nobody's listening here on the internet. It's a part of a negotiation, and sometimes the other party has some desire to focus on some areas, and then maybe the other party says, okay, we agree to address it, but not with a fixed quota. Think about the bodyguard picture. And sometimes it could be also a result of such a negotiation. So I hope I didn't talk too much, but I hope that the KV system and their position in the German statutory health insurance system became a little bit more tangible for you, and yeah, open for questions and discussions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, I think, Matthias. Before we come to the question, maybe very briefly, KVs can be the watchdogs. I mean, as you said already, but they might also be the bodyguards. I think that's quite clear. I think maybe to also quickly, I think explain, I think obviously KVs are not, let's say, building reference price groups, etc. Right? I think we have just shown that. That was maybe a bit misleading on one of the slides. It's rather, let's say, need to be seen maybe in the kind of context of the quotas, etc. I think that was more where we were leaning towards. We have just seen one of the questions, and that was obviously an important one. But I think important is also, I think, what you, Matthias, as well, just nicely described, right? The responsibilities which start basically really with the individual physician up to the point that you need to manage then the overall kind of, let's say, budget, which is then obviously coming also more from a national level, where I think also, and that's maybe also one of the first questions back. I mean, when you see, let's say, the AMNOG with all of the different kind of products, et cetera, which might also be, let's say, sometimes be challenging from a cost of budget impact, maybe if you break it down to a KV level, right? I mean, how do you do those kind of, let's say, planning ahead of time, right? Maybe the kind of forecasting or anything. Are you doing there some pre-screening, or is that really what that you say, look, whenever it is submitted to AMNOG, then we start, which is a bit different to other countries because then the product is already available, right?
The one learning in about 20 years consulting to our physicians, and what we tell physicians when we start, usually your budget is like a tanker. Your budget is driven by your prescription structure, and you have things coming in, coming out. You have an expensive patient, you have a cheap patient. So usually, except of very exceptional cases, it's on the physician's level overall quite constant. And the same is true for the overall budget. If you look at we had to have a relatively stable drug spending increase in Germany between 3% and 4% per year. And also in the negotiations on the federal level about the general budget, which is then translated to regional budgets, they work with an innovation factor of usually around 3%. And at the end of the day, it works because you have the savings from the biosimilars, you have MNOC drugs, and Stefan, you have MNOC drugs with very high prices, but you have also MNOC drugs. Look at areas like multiple sclerosis, a drug like Tecfidera, for example, as an alternative to interference, no additional benefits, same price. Pre-MNOC, they would have launched with a premium in Germany. So that it's not, it's a very, we are managing a tanker. And I see this also sometimes in interaction with the industry. We are not having a dedicated heart failure, diabetes, or whatever team, to be very clear there. It is, of course, if you have an area like heart failure, where you have currently a lot of developments, new drugs coming, you look at the benefits fit assessments, how do you communicate it, and so on. But it's not the way that we are sitting there every day. And the experience also, what I think you have this also in interaction with your client. One thing is the MNOC procedure and the price negotiation. That's a hurdle, but that's a hurdle to be on the football field, not to. It's not the way. It's not meaning you shoot a goal. What's happening then in practice is very different, and often it's simply also a watch and wait approach to say, okay, it has a benefit assessment, it's a high price, are physicians really going to use it? So we are not having a very sophisticated budget planning for each drug. It's more a holistic approach, and it's more looking about either drugs, of course, where we see alternatives that we could manage to cheaper alternatives, and or if we have areas like the PCSK9, where because of MNOC and GBA decision, you have a very restricted reimbursement scope, and physicians are in a risk again of paying for the drug if they pay out of it. These are more the areas where we play the bodyguard, but it's not like a complex budget allocation system for each drug.
Questions, right?
Yes, we received a lot of, thank you, Matthias, for that. We received a couple of further questions here. The first question is actually about, do you observe many regress cases in general practice or in general practitioners, perhaps not only regarding drug budget, but also quotas for other services like visits at home or palliative care? Do your physicians still love you?
Yes, of course, because we, to be very clear, we are not punishing the physician. If there is an economic audit, it's done by an independent authority. We have to fund them with 50%, and this health insurances with the other 50%. In the GP area, the question touches on several aspects. So any punishment because of an overall uneconomic prescription, Richtgrößen, Durchschnittswertregress is practically zero in the GP area. So physicians who look at their quotas do not have a risk to pay for exceeding their overall budget. First statement. But second statement, we have about, for GPs, 3,000 to 4,000 individual cases where when individual health insurance first files a case against the physician, you prescribe omeprazole and didn't code the correct indication. You prescribe Pradaxa 75 milligram, but the label would be 110 milligram for those patients. So the risk for an overall economic audit is very, very low in Germany today. Statement one. You see a lot of this relatively small punishments, or at least requests for payback for statutory health insurances, which of course, if you communicate to physicians, he always says, I had 5 regresse last year, which is not an 100,000 euro payback because of exceeding the overall budget, but it's often 70 euros here, 150 euros here. And that's psychologically a nightmare for the physicians, because they have this mindset, we treat our patients, we prescribe for 400,000 euros per year at GP. We do our best. We prescribe generics and so on. And now the AOK, whatever, wants 75 euro 20 back. And that makes them really angry. So the absolute risk in terms of paying back money in a relevant amount, which is really risky for the existence of the physicians, as long as you don't prescribe an eculizumab off label, something like this, is very low. But we have a lot of these small punishments by especially some health insurances. And that is what creates the mood. In terms of palliative care physician services, we have only problems if the physicians do something where they need a special authorization, for example, which was not obtained early enough, or if they work more than 16 hours per day, because we also track, because we have only one amount of money. So it would be unfair if one physician charges 36 hours working per day to get more out of this fixed amount. And sometimes physicians who charge to us too much services, which is not possible from a time perspective, then they have also to pay back some honorarium. But again, if you look a little bit for the rules, except of this beautiful little stuff from the health insurances, because prescribing omeprazole, the risk is really low.
Okay, great for that insight. I mean, we're just like on the part where we put the drug on the market and we do the price negotiation. But when we do the price negotiation, and that's also one question of the audience, there's also this word Praxisbesonderheit, which is a really special German word. So maybe you can explain the importance of that Praxisbesonderheit or praxis exemption, what it is for AMNOT drugs and why is it so important?
So the audience can be glad that we didn't invite a lawyer, then it would be another.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Hope no lawyers in the audience. It's a complex legal structure. So we have Praxisbesonderheiten are a budget exemption when they are in an audit about their overall prescription volume. We have two definitions of Praxisbesonderheiten. One is on the federal level as part of an AMNOG price negotiation. Manufacturer and health insurance can agree that the price for the prescription is not taken into the overall budget calculation, either for all prescription of the drug or in different sub-indications. So this is the meaning of the definition of a Praxisbesonderheit on the federal level. If you fulfill the definition, it doesn't count against your budget. First type of Praxisbesonderheit. And Praxisbesonderheiten are also part of the regional contracting, setting the regional efficiency audit framework, because always if you work with an average prescription volume, you must reflect that in some cases you have a very expensive patient with an orphan drug, you have more patients with an RA, whatever. And then there, in addition to this AMNOG budget exemption, there are also regional budget exemptions, different depending on the regional contracting. Yeah, that's the situation with Praxisbesonderheiten. So a Praxisbesonderheit on the federal level can help you very much because it's something that makes it more safe for the physician to prescribe. But on the other hand, it's helpful. But if you look at stories like Entresto, for example, very good benefit rating, mortality benefit in the clinical trial, negotiated price, quite high, 5-6 euros per day, if I remember correctly, and a full budget exemption. And still the prescription uptake is not very high. Despite there was never a negative letter by any health insurance. So Praxisbesonderheiten can help, but it's not like you put a sign or you make a nice printing on the shirt of your sales rep, Praxisbesonderheit, and the physician prescribes. Be careful. So the Entresto experience is that physicians still look at the price and think, okay, 3,000 euros per year and a little bit complex to treat. So we see there that they're really cautious. So Praxisbesonderheiten, especially on the federal level, they apply everywhere in Germany, can be very useful, but also are only one part of a successful value story.
Yeah, and we have great audience listening here, so that comes actually the follow-up question here to the Praxisbesonderheit. So what do you think regarding regulations in the future about the Praxisbesonderheit? I mean, we're now 10 years on, and will be there a subnational regulation necessary in the future, so regional Praxisbesonderheit?
The Praxisbesonderheiten on the federal level are by definition valid everywhere in Germany, no matter, you cannot exclude them in any regional contracting. So if you have it on the federal level, it's you have it for all regions of Germany. Where the regional efficiency audit system moves to is a very difficult question. Two answers or two perspectives. One is the statistic efficiency audits don't hurt anybody practically anymore because you have practically zero cases where physicians have to pay something back. What sense does it make to have a regional efficiency audit based on prescription volumes if today in our region and in all other regions, more than 2/3, almost 67, 68% of the prescribed daily doses, defined daily doses, are having a rebate contract with an individual sick fund. So 2/3 of the prescription volume of the physician doesn't know the price anymore. It's a little bit philosophic now, but practically the whole statistic audit for guys like you with a statistical background, it doesn't make sense anymore because it only makes sense if you know I prescribe something. This has price A, this has price B, and I'm responsible for the difference. But if out of 10 boxes you prescribe, only 3 have a visible price tag and the other have a price tag which means something, but you don't know it. It doesn't really make much sense anymore, but it's for the health insurances so nice to have this and the feeling to put some pressure on the physicians. And the politicians think, okay, otherwise the physicians prescribe what they want. So I cannot predict how long we have this regional statistical audits. But if you keep this number in mind, about more than 2/3 of the prescribed daily doses are having a sick fund individual rebate contract in Germany, which practically means the price is ticked out. Think about how much sense such a statistic makes.
Okay. But having that in mind with the rebate contracts, you said, and also more and more drugs get a Praxisbesonderheit, do we still need that regulation of the Praxisbesonderheit? Or is it just like...
On the federal level, yes, because it helps with MNOC products, and it helps that you do not have discussions in 70 regions that your new drug is included as a Praxisbesonderheit. And on the regional level, as long as there are statistic audits, you need the Praxisbesonderheit. It's like a vicious circle.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good one. Yeah. Then we come a little bit to the questions of the KV structures. So KV became more flexibility in the regional negotiations in several years. What do you expect in the future on the subnational level? Are there any trends coming up?
Yes, I think I wrote to you in the preparation. I wrote to Stefan and Lutz a potential topic for one of our next webinars next year.
Okay.
Currently, the regional drug management is quite calm. You have some biosimilar quotas. We will see biosimilar substitution next year in the public pharmacies. We don't have Me Too's anymore because of the MNOC or not relevant. So there's at the moment not so many quotas out there. But what I foresee that in a few years we get really, really interesting discussions, which are really then again subject to regional management, is the first MNOC products run out of patent. And if we have other MNOC products with the same indication which are still under patent. For example, think about the overlapping labels of abiraterone and enzalutamide in prostate cancer. And if one of them, I think abiraterone, becomes generic first, the clinical data is still there, then we have a generic with a considerable additional benefit and a branded product with a considerable additional benefit and potentially a price delta of 95%. And I think that could be, then we have again potentials, and that closes also now the circle to the beginning of my statement. Where is drug management focused on regionally? On deltas of costs. And I think with the patent expiry of the first MDOC products, there will be much more room for management. And I think that this will be in the future a focus in terms of addressing such potentials, and also where we also change our management and consulting for the physician. It becomes more and more complex. Look at areas, even the GP areas, diabetes, heart failure, more and more treatment option, complex data. And it's good that we have much more data, which the manufacturer bring today because also of the HTA process. And I think on the one hand, it's going more to a qualitative consulting about the drugs with positive benefit ratings, and on the other hand, it's addressing those financial potentials where we have more from in the future. And I'm really interested how the health insurances will approach this, and I think we will have a lot of discussions on this when the first cases come up in the future.
Wonderful. That leads us to the next question you just half answered. So what are the individual positions who contribute to KV drug management, and which roles are responsible for policy and formulary decision making? So you told us already, well, you look at the stats. So the statistician is the one major part there. The others, from your point of view?
Maybe I provide what we are doing. So we have 11,000 physicians in the drug management team. I have 22 people. It's 2 physicians, 6 pharmacists, 7, 8 PTAs, pharmazeutisch-technische Assistenten, 2 statisticians, and people to organize. What we are doing is the contracting. The colleagues in the hotlines answer about 25,000 calls in the drug hotline per year. We do about 1,000 individual consultings with our physicians. And in that team, we also then, of course, define what are the priorities in terms of our consulting activities, what we see, which questions are coming up. Sometimes you just work a full year on COVID vaccination, and organization can also happen with such a team. But that's the structure and how it works. And yeah, it's basically one team. We do all of these different functions. So maybe this is a surprise for I'm sometimes joking to the health insurances and say, if you have 4 billion euro spending, if you would give us 50 million euro more, we could have some ideas to bring down the spending significantly. But yeah, it's managed with but with small teams, and the reason is really therefore why we focus on the huge potentials and not on a complex case by case or disease management.
Great. Well, it's almost 10 o'clock, so we do one last question, but the audience, we try to get answers on your other questions here, just with a follow-up email. So Matthias, the one last question for tonight we want to ask you here in the webinar is, we have that DGAS, right, that digital health applications also here in Germany now. Do you also need to manage that DGAS, or is that out of the KVs?
It's not a part of the physician's budget, which is under an efficiency audit. So therefore, formally, it's at the moment, no. And I'm not really sure how it will develop in the future. It slowly starts. We have always some early adopters. We get questions from physicians, can I prescribe it, and so on. But it's still in the starting phase. And currently it's not a relevant area where our physicians ask us, and it's also currently not a management focus area today, because first of all, it's no formal threat, so I don't have to put on my bodyguard sunglasses and to jump out of the car immediately. And honestly, the introduction of DIGA, we are doing very much COVID management or the vaccination management since now, before with mass diagnostic centers. So since about 2 years, there's simply no room to focus significantly, to put additional efforts on such areas. So it's more or less under the radar on regional management, from a regional management perspective.
Great. Thank you very much, Matthias, for all that insights here about the KVs. I look at our hang time here with the audience, and it's actually really great. So great speaker tonight. Thank you very much, Matthias, here for joining us tonight. And we're also looking for you to have it on our podcast, but we want to point out here again, our podcast here with Peter Zweifel and Dorwong here about the digital innovation, the DIGAs.
And just by the way, look, I think the very first episode, Matthias, were the two of us, right?
Exactly, that was
still available.
Yeah. Exactly. And then coming to the end, our Christmas session here is with our good friends from the MedVens team here, AMNOG Impact on the European Countries, our joint webinar with MedVens, our great board discussion here with Mariangela Prada from Italy, from Intexo, and Paul Graham from Remed, from the UK, Vincent here from Next Step, and Max, our good friend from Spain. And of course, with Dr. Stefan Walzer, who was your speaker tonight. And again, thank you, Matthias, here also for joining us. This wouldn't be a great webinar without our guests here. So thank you very much to you.
Thank you, Matthias. It was great.
Yeah. I'm Lutz Homer. I was your moderator tonight. I hope you liked it. If you want to rewatch it, check out our YouTube channel or our website, which is www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de, where you find all our webinars with our great speakers here. COVID numbers are going high, so stay healthy. That's all, and hope to see you all there now in the Christmas session of our next webinar. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye. Bye, Matthias.